Even though Victoria was the Queen, it was still a man's world. But she was a woman who was rich. She was happy to do what was not expected women to do. She was tall and strong, and inside of her heart she had a great deal of adventure. And now she found herself on an ocean-going yacht, far away from England and far away from men whose tongues would wag and say that she was a woman who did not know her place. She was far away on an ocean that was as flat and as calm as a mirror. Now the yacht, as the sun shone in this early hour, as the sun shone upon it, it looked golden and glistening. This rich woman was not alone on her yacht, for she had brought with her a servant. Not a manservant, but a woman who was nearly as tall as she. Now, just as she was incredibly rich, her servant was very poor. But it didn't stop her from being any kind of a fool, for she would look over the edge of the boat, and she would see the oceans, she would see the lands, she would see the strange creatures, and she would admire the way that her mistress had taken her away from the heart of London to come and look at some of the furthest parts of Victoria's empire. This was not a holiday, for this rich woman wanted to bring things back that people had never seen, whether they were rich or they were poor, whether they were a commoner or a queen, so that they could be placed inside of a museum for everyone to see. And it wasn't the first time that she travelled far over the unfriendly waters, but she'd brought back many things to the museums, things that men would grudgingly look at and say, yes, I suppose you did a good job bringing back those things from the other continents. But now, as she stood by the side of the water, she stood and looked at the ocean, she took a brush from out of her bag and started to comb her long and lustrous hair. But when she looked into the water, she could see something that was floating there. It looked small and thin and seemed to move this way and that. Now, she was frightened, but not so frightened that you could tell by the look on her face, for she had a great curiosity inside of her heart, as well as a spirit of adventure. She looked towards it. She hoped that it might lead to treasure, great treasures of the other civilizations, so that everyone in London could see what she'd brought back. But then she looked at it. Whatever it was that floated in the water, it was alive. It had skin that was sleek and scaled. She thought that it must be some kind of a monster, and she was frightened. Now her hand faltered on the rail at the side of the boat. She slipped and she fell in the water with a great and a terrible splash. But her maidservant heard her falling into the water, and from her work where she was scrubbing at the deck, she didn't hesitate for a single heartbeat, for she threw herself into the water to save her mistress. But there was one thing that she'd forgotten to do. There were two women, alone, at the far reaches of Victoria's empire, and she had forgotten to lower the ladder so that they could get back onto the yacht. The two of them knew that there was no way that they could climb up the smooth and golden surface of the yacht. So they swam, the two of them, side by side. They swam until they came to dry land. I'll tell you this, the woman, still with the curiosity inside of her heart, and still with the great spirit of adventure, when they had landed on that far and distant shore, she started to look about. She found things, treasure, not buried, but laying by the side of some old temple. She picked them up, she put them into a pile, and waited for the day that perhaps someone would return. Now the two of them, they could not say that one was rich and the other was poor, for the two of them had to survive. The mistress had always been friendly, but as the two of them, as equal as any man or woman on all of this earth, the two of them were equal, even though they were surrounded by gold and silver that they could not spend. The two of them became great friends. And I've got to tell you that the rich woman was astonished at how much her maidservant had learned. And the two of them would sit there, and they would brush at their hair, and sit and watch the sun go down by the side of the flat, smooth ocean. And she knew that when they returned to the heart of Victoria's empire, she would have many things to tell them. No, not her alone. The two of them, as equals, had much to tell the world that they would be able to see when it was placed inside of a museum.